Okay, so it is 2 o'clock, so it's time for me to open this Matter 6 hearing session for the Sandwell Local Plan Examination. I'm Catherine Jack, I'm the inspector appointed to examine this plan. This is a fully virtual session. Everybody in attendance at the moment has already attended a similar session, so I don't think I need to go through any of the housekeeping details because it's the same as it was this morning. Other than if anybody does have any questions, if you could just raise your hand now. Otherwise, we'll carry on. And the same applies with use the raise hand function. And if you can remember to turn off your microphone when you've finished speaking, that's helpful. We are live streaming and the council is recording this session today, as with the others. Let's, for the purposes of the live stream and anyone watching, let's just do our usual introductions. So if I can go to the council officers in the room and Mr. Richards, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam. Hugh Richards again, planning barrister advising the council.
Good afternoon, Bart Sherm, Sandwell Council.
Afternoon, Samantha Holder, Sandwell Council. Afternoon, Patricia McCullough, Sandwell Council.
Okay, thank you very much. And Miss Barton.
Good afternoon, everyone. Holly Barton of SIBO Planning, representing Vulcan Property.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so this is Matter 6. This is the health and well-being policies of the plan, SHW1 to SHW6. And to start with, we will look at SHW1, which is the policy for health impact assessments. My question 6.1 was relevant to this. Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Carter.
Hello there.
Would you just like to briefly introduce yourself? That's as far as we've got as introductions, and I was just about to move into my first question about the first policy.
Okay, I'm David Carter from Tyler Parks, here representing the Police and Crime Commissioner of the West Midlands. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yes, so we're going to look at SHW1 first, which is the Health Impact Assessments Policy. My question 6.1 was relevant, and there's no statements or participants in relation to that one, but there are still a couple of queries that I've got about this policy. The first relates to the relationship of Criterion 1 and Criterion 2. Now, just to clarify in my mind, the council's intention with Criterion 1, I believe, is that it is not a health impact assessment as such at that point. It's an assessment of health-related impacts, if you like, but something less than a full formal HIA, similar to the approach that the council is taking with a basic flood risk analysis. And then Criterion 2 brings in a more formal HIA, health impact assessment approach, and sets out when either a full or a rapid HIA would be required. Firstly, if the council could just confirm that that is indeed the position, and also is it clear enough in the policy, but particularly in the supporting text about that distinction between what's expected between the two things, because 6.13 and 6.14 seek to set out what the council wants to see in a health impact assessment, what that should address. Does that supporting information relate purely to the true health impact assessments from Criterion 2? And if so, should there be a bit more assistance as to what is actually expected from an applicant in relation to Criterion 1? I hope that's clear and not too lengthy. Over to the council.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. There is this initial sift, which is criterion 1, and then from that, criterion 2 is requesting the more formal assessment should the outcome of the sifting criterion 1 dictate it. And again, you're right. 6.13 goes straight into the requirements for the formal HIA, and we could probably do with a paragraph in front of that, setting the context a little bit better.
That's paragraph 2, isn't it?
It's criterion 1 is the general.
Yeah, and criterion 2 is the full.
Yeah. But in the supporting text,
Yes.
we need something before 6.13 just to clarify what applies when, or how we would expect it to be addressed.
Yes, I think so. So that it's clear that everybody needs to do step 1 as an initial sift, and then those that need to, following that and meet the criteria of 2, then go on to do the additional stuff that's set out in 6.14.
Yeah, and we had a discussion earlier today that policy 1, 3 and 4 aren't actually therefore to do with impact assessments, and therefore the policy could probably better be called just health impact, and delete the word assessment from the title of the policy.
Yes.
Because all 4 criteria are about health impact.
Yeah.
But only one of them is about an assessment.
Indeed. Okay. And 1 after A to E is followed by a sentence explaining that a development will only be permitted where it will not have a negative health impact against those considerations. But there's no such similar statement following 2. I wonder whether that's intentional, or whether there's something about 1 that specifically requires that. But if that's almost a sifting stage, and some schemes will have to go further, whether either that isn't necessary and should be in the supporting text, isn't necessary as policy, or should come later. What's the council's thoughts on that?
I think we think it should probably come a bit later.
Yeah.
Is that correct? I mean,
it should probably come as a standalone 3.
Yes.
And then renumber 3 and 4.
Yeah.
In 1C, it talks about major new waste handling and processing development. Is there any need to explain what's meant by major in that context?
I think we could probably put a link into a definition, maybe the relevant planning definition. I mean, obviously as planners we're used to the concepts of major and minor, but somebody coming to this afresh, and we've seen this in other representations, are not clear. So yes. we can put a footnote, or we can put something in the glossary about that, if there isn't already something in the glossary, which there might be.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful, particularly as well because there aren't many references to major and waste through, so it's even something people are even less familiar with than majors and minors for housing, for example.
Yes.
And it was raised by a representative who clearly thought it ought to be clarified.
Yeah.
Okay. council statement has identified criterion 4. I mean, we talked about renumbering 3 and 4, but actually you're seeking to delete 4, aren't you?
Yeah.
On the basis that it's effectively become redundant because of changes to use classes, etc.
That's my understanding. I am in contact, or I have contacted our development management colleagues just to confirm that. That was my understanding. And if on the basis that the new use classes order now sort of renders it necessary because off licenses are sui generis, then yes, we can delete it.
Okay. I think that is all I wanted to raise on SHW1. Anybody else got any other further thoughts on that? So SHW2 then, which is a policy for healthcare infrastructure. Mr. Carter, you've made representations on behalf of West Midlands Police in relation to this one. And you're essentially of the view that the policy should be expanded to include other wellbeing and safety infrastructure alongside what it says about healthcare infrastructure, which is obviously the focus of and the title of the policy. The council's view is essentially that this is particularly a healthcare policy and therefore doesn't need to cover those other types of infrastructure or make specific reference to policing infrastructure. So, I mean, I know that in your statement you've suggested some modifications, but first of all, is it necessary for soundness for a healthcare policy to refer to the changes that you want in relation to police and emergency services infrastructure? Mr. Carter.
Yes, thank you. By way of introduction to this, if you look at the plan as a whole, then set out in the plan, there are policies or sections that deal with various aspects of infrastructure. So I've jotted down a few: transport, health that we're dealing with, green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, playing fields, sports, energy waste, digital, media, and telecommunications and education, but not police or blue light services more generally. And that sort of leads me to ask the rhetorical question, well, why not the blue light services? Because it sort of implies that those services are treated with less significance within the plan. And I take your point about the amendment that I've suggested to this particular policy, because the policy does focus on health. And I mean, one of the things that I suggested was that the title of the policy could be amended to include safety alongside health and well-being. But actually that's a comment that really applies to the whole chapter, to be quite honest, not necessarily just this policy. And there may be different ways of sort of skinning a cat, as it were. So it might be that this is not the most appropriate place to make those changes. But if you follow the line of my argument, it does seem to me that there are more detailed expressions of the approach and policy towards all manner of types of infrastructure, but the policing and blue light services are not so covered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So over to the council then about
Yes,
these the particular points that we've touched on in some earlier sessions as well about, well, should the plan be doing more to highlight police and blue light infrastructure, and then, well, is this the right or the wrong policy to do so, and then perhaps focus on the council's views on the particular suggested mods in that light that are in Mr. Carter's statement, please.
yes, Madam, as a result of the sessions we've had to date, Mr. Carter has succeeded in securing any number of references to blue light infrastructure in the plan. Perhaps when he was writing this matter statement, he wasn't as confident of doing so on earlier occasions, and therefore, out of an abundance of caution, was trying to smuggle it into this chapter as well. But this is a chapter about health, and therefore health infrastructure gets mentioned. If there was a chapter about crime, then police infrastructure might get a mention. There is a mention of police infrastructure in the design chapters, because of course designing out crime is relevant to that. So I think, with respect to Mr. Carter, he's done very well thus far at the examination, and the amendments he seeks to this chapter are not required in order to make it sound.
Okay. In terms of, I mean, you just said if there was a chapter about crime, that particular point that Mr. Carter raised about, well, there are all these different infrastructures that he listed that either have got their own chapter or their own policy.
But there isn't
Should there be one about crime, or is that addressed through design?
It's not. There does not need to be a chapter about crime. It is addressed through design, and it's also addressed through the infrastructure policies. So we say there is simply no need to make the changes he suggests.
I think just in addition to that as well, I mean, the police have, you know, over the years produced some very helpful design guidance secured by design and Parkmark. We do reference those in our policies, such that where we're talking about infrastructure and where we're talking about the role of designing out crime and addressing those sorts of issues, as we say, it's threaded through the other policies in a way that, for example, the need for new ambulance stations isn't. It's a crude example, but it's basically saying that I think these are slightly different approaches to infrastructure, in as much as we already know what the police think, we already know what they want. And in terms of other forms of infrastructure, we're using the plan to specify in a way that perhaps we don't have to so much with police infrastructure.
Okay, Mr. Carter, an opportunity for you to come back on that if you want to. And also, I mean, in terms of your wider suggestion about, well, maybe the whole chapter should be including crime. It's a health and well-being chapter, but if you start including safety, crime, you know, what else needs to come under that umbrella that also potentially is elsewhere in the plan? Mr. Carter,
yes.
your thoughts.
If I could come back briefly, I mean, first of all, I accept what Mr. Richards say about the points where sort of main modifications have been discussed, and hopefully they will come forward in due course, and we obviously welcome those. But I think I would stick with my main thrust of the argument that that crime-related issues are not dealt with in a comparable in sort of parity with other services and infrastructure. I mean, as a matter of fact, there is a reference to safety in this chapter in one of the introductory paragraphs. And while Mr. Richard said the chapter is about health, well, it's not just about health as such, is it? Because, for instance, later on there are questions about policies about the provision of open space and playing fields. So, I mean, it would be possible to widen the chapter and include a separate policy related to crime-related issues if that were the way forward. Just one final point, that I do accept that the explicit reference in national policy to policing has come forward in the most recent version of the NPPF, which is not the version, I guess, that the plan was prepared under. But I mean, I think we'd be happy to leave it with you to think about this. And you know, if there's nothing in this plan, then it seems to me that it's definitely something that should be strengthened as part of any review. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Does the council just want to respond on that parity point? I mean, I think you have in part covered that, but it's specifically on parity with other types of infrastructure.
I think that the plan, as we've now accepted it, should be modified. Treats police infrastructure with parity. Mm-hmm. Even Mr. Carter and his reps wasn't contending for a new chapter on police.
Okay. That is something I will be mulling over. The council's statement suggests adding the word infrastructure into the last sentence, part 2 of the policy. Which so that it refers to healthcare facilities, infrastructure and services. I've got no particular concern with, or anybody wants to comment on that, but I did wonder whether there is any need on that similar basis for the word infrastructure. Should it also be added to point 3, which talks about facilities and services, but doesn't include the word infrastructure?
Yes, I think that's probably a fair comment. And it covers every possibility in that case when we're looking at the major schemes.
Okay, and also in part 3 of the policy, at the end of the last sentence after the comma, it talks about requirements and calculation methods set out in local development documents. What is that meaning or referring to, please?
So I feel like that may carry forward.
Yeah. This, I think this policy was originally drafted as part of the Black Country Plan. So it appeared in the Reg 18 Black Country Plan, which, as you know, was not carried forward. That is probably a carry through from that. Again, at a time possibly when we were thinking that we would have the opportunity to develop further guidance documents. As set out at the moment, we don't have relevant local development documents, so I think that is deleted.
Yeah, maybe the full stop just needs to come under after such services where the comma is, and delete the rest of it in that case.
Maybe it appears earlier in the it appears earlier.
Oh, yes, sorry. Mr. Sherms just pointed out the fact that it also a reference to local development documents.
Oh, there is one.
The first sentence in part 3 as well.
Yeah.
So we'll delete both references.
Yeah, I think so. They take you nowhere, don't they? Okay. So an to delete both references. Okay, and criterion 6 says the effects of obligations on viability may be a relevant consideration. My query here is whether that's necessary as a final criterion for this policy. You haven't included a similar sort of criterion in specifically like that in other policies that might have a particular financial viability query about them. Is there a particular justification for why 6 is explicit in this policy? Was it meant to be there? Is it meant to be a hook to SID 1, or should it be left to the supporting text? 6.28 draws in viability, whether it should be there.
I think you're right. I think this is probably just a clumsy way of trying to, link the issues around making sure schemes don't affect viability or vice versa to the wider sort of approach of the plan. So if you think it would be better in supporting text, that we can certainly look at.
Yeah, we'll just delete it because it's already mentioned in the text, and it's the subject of policies later in the plan.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And while we're in paragraph 6.28, it's a tiny little point, but I'm assuming that it will actually be for the development to fund its own healthcare needs rather than a housing developer to be funding theirs. It made me giggle because I thought, well, if they're having a new, a hip replacement, they might fund that. But
well, they make lots of things, so I don't see why they can't. Maybe they wouldn't want to. So yes, it should be development.
Okay, that's all that I had on SHW2. Any further comment on that one? Right, so SHW3 is air quality. Now, there is PAM 40 on this one that we need to talk about, and I know Ms. Barton has made some comments, and you've acknowledged PAM 40, which has been introduced to set out that the whole of the borough is subject to an air quality management. It should be area, shouldn't it, rather than plan at the end of the new sentence. But Vulcan still consider it's important that SHW3 should set out specific expectations in terms of air quality assessments and when those would kick in. And in your view, that should only apply to major developments.
Yes.
Is this a change, firstly, that's necessary for soundness in your view, and then B, on what basis do you think the major development threshold is the justified one? Can you point me to somewhere where that's set out either in national policy or the evidence?
Yes, thank you, Inspector. So we have prepared our representations again with the thought process of seeking to ensure that the policy is justified and consistent with national policy. It is planning practice guidance, which confirms that an air quality assessment should be triggered, or should not be triggered, sorry, where a development is not anticipated to give rise to concerns associated with air quality. And it is also within policy, as in the National Planning Policy Framework, in terms of major development proposals. As part of our representations, we also were just mindful that an air quality management area can hypothetically change, and we're just wanting to ensure that the policy wording gives an allowance for that to potentially be the case. Whereas at the moment it's very much covers Sandwell as an entirety, and perhaps doesn't offer that flexibility should that change.
Okay, so you referenced the PPG and what it says about an assessment shouldn't be triggered if development isn't anticipated to give rise to air quality concerns. Is that the same as having a specified threshold for the assessment, whether that's majors or something else? I mean, obviously at the moment the whole borough is declared an air quality management area. So I'm just thinking about, you know, what the PPG says and whether that is the same or equates to, or could equate to in this instance, majors, or would it be something else? Because it could be something smaller maybe that might give rise to air quality concerns, could it?
Yes, it could, but the approach that we've noted would be a matter of being consistent with national policy.
Do you know which paragraph number you're referring to in the framework?
Unfortunately not off the top of my head, but if you leave that with me, I can confirm.
That'd be helpful.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, meanwhile, I will go to the council for their thoughts, and they might be able to tell me the framework policy paragraph number as well. Mr. Richards or somebody in the room for the council? What about this threshold for major developments?
We had paragraph 193. What were we talking about? Built businesses and facilities should not have unreasonable restrictions placed on them.
That's existing.
Yeah, and 194. Focus of planning policies and decisions should be on whether proposed development is an acceptable use of land, rather than the control of processes or emissions, where these are subject to separate pollution control regimes.
But not a majors as a threshold.
No.
Particularly. Perhaps Miss Barton can confirm in a minute if those were the two paragraphs she was thinking of. So what's the council's view about what the policy says in light of the suggestion that Miss Barton said, in her view, for soundness, there should be this majors as a threshold for triggering an AQA, air quality assessment?
Again, just as a little bit of background, this was initially a policy in the core strategy. So presumably it has been looked at and tested over time. It also appeared in the draft Black Country Plan, which went out to public consultation, although it was never obviously never taken forward. I think broadly speaking, we can amend it to make reference to an air quality management area, and point out the fact that, you know, this is something that covers the borough. Going forward, whether we want to look again, perhaps in the next iteration of this never-ending document, given the likelihood or the possibility of the borough-wide AQMA changing, you know, it might be something for the next plan to look at and to refine the approach that we set out here. As I say, it's a long-standing approach that we've adopted. It's not to say it's the best approach, but it's to say it's an approach that works as far as we're.
Okay. So it's part 5, isn't it, that talks about air quality assessment specifically at the moment, and it sets out some requirements. Majors isn't one of those, whether that's right or wrong, but it seems to me it talks about any future changes to the extent of the air quality management area potentially are covered by where it says whenever development is proposed in locations where air quality does not or will not meet national objectives. So in terms of the policy wording, it seems to me, probably some flex there for a future change to the air quality management area.
Yes.
And the extent of that declaration. I wonder whether it might help if the supporting text covered that in a bit more detail, because you're looking to add in this paragraph to say that it covers the whole borough. Should that also refer to the air quality action plan? I presume there's a current one in place for Sandwell.
We are actually in the process of producing one. I spoke to colleagues in public health very recently, and they are literally in the process of preparing an action plan. They've just been out to consultation on it, as I understand.
Okay. So, and is that the first iteration? Have you had an action plan previously?
Yes, we have had an action plan previously. Yes, there's an extent.
There is an extant one. Okay, so it might be worth talking about air quality action plans in that, with that other sentence generally. Would it be possible to put the extant and the emerging action plans in the library, please, so I can see those?
Sorry, Inspector. I was just thinking as we were talking just now, going back to the issue around majors. Major is a suitable criterion for assessment. Obviously, in a place like Sandwell, there are going to be these sort of hotspots, if you like, where schemes come forward that are not particularly large in terms of the definition of majors, but which will have a very clear impact potentially on emissions generally. I mean, we're thinking about things like small power stations or generators, or any number of sort of industrial related processes. So I think if we stuck to the definition of majors, that might exclude us from being able to focus on these smaller instances where we might need that additional data.
Ms. Barton, have you identified where you think the majors references in national policy?
Apologies, I haven't yet. I will continue to look, and if I can't find it, or I feel like I need to come back to it and avoid missing out on discussion, I am joining tomorrow's sessions. So if that is okay, I can provide that information for tomorrow.
Yes, that will be fine. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Inspector.
Mute for a second.
Bear with me, I'm just making a note. Okay. So the air quality management area, now I know it covers the whole borough. I don't think you've got it as a layer on your policies map. And the question is, am I right and should it be?
You're right, it's not a layer on the policies map. At the moment, it is borough-wide, so it is the whole of the borough. But we were just discussing actually that air quality is improving across the borough, and I believe the draft version of the new management plan does set an expectation that if things continue in the next few years, it may be that the boundary does change and might not cover the whole of the borough or might be removed completely. So it's whether it would be useful to have it on the policies map if we're expecting that boundary to change perhaps within the next few years. I'm not sure, but I'm sure we'd be more than happy to include it if you think it would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it may seem obvious because the whole borough is currently declared, but actually if you don't know the borough and you don't know that, and you're coming and looking at policy, looking at specific site on the interactive policies map and thinking, does it apply? Then actually, yeah, it should be there, shouldn't it, as the geographic expression of, do I need to do an air quality assessment?
Would it help?
People can always turn it off once they've used that layer, they can switch it off, can't they?
Once it's all sparkling clean.
Yeah.
Be helpful to have some reference in the supporting text to the fact that the borough is covered by AQA.
That's your PAM 40, isn't it?
Yeah, and that the action plan, once that is adopted, will we can identify that it will apply to whatever issues and areas it applies to.
Yeah, I mean, and you can reference in the supporting text that air quality is, I think you might have already mentioned actually that air quality is improving, and that might change, if you haven't already mentioned it, that the extent of the ACMAR might change depending on the revised evidence. Okay. I don't think I need to ask anything else about SHW3. Have you said everything you wanted to say on it, Spartan, now? Until possibly tomorrow when you update me on your...
Yes, nothing more to add on that policy. Thank you, Inspector.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to SHW4, which is open space and recreation. I've got a few questions about this, but I think what we'll do is we'll start with the PAMs that relate to this, which is, I think, is 21 onwards, because that 21 to 27 possibly, because 21 and 22 set out a change to the ratio in the policy, which would need to be main mods, but obviously that has a bearing on the rest of the discussion, so we need to highlight that first. Now, the reason for that change is that a couple of sites, there's a water site and what is it? National Grid site, isn't it? Severn Trent Water and National Grid sites were included where they shouldn't be because they're not actually publicly available. That's right, yeah. Nods, yeah. And in removing those, it's resulted in a tweak to the ratio.
That's correct. Yes, it's reduced the amount of accessible open space across the borough. So in response, we've reduced the target of amount of open space that should be provided by 1,000 people.
Okay. So in that context, then, let's talk about Ms. Barton's position again for Vulcan, that rather than a sort of blanket approach of the ratio that the policy sets out, which will be a slightly different figure from the submitted plan, 3.235, the view is that to be sound, it should be based on what's the identified need associated with a given development in a locality, in the locality of that development. So, Ms. Barton, first of all, why do you think that needs to change for soundness? And B, what do you mean when you talk about the locality of the development? How would that be based?
So as the policy, as it's currently drafted, allows for recognition of the fact that it may not be feasible to deliver open space and recreation space on a site. If there is an instance whereby the council then considers agreeing an off-site contribution in lieu of that on-site, to ensure that that contribution meets the relevant tests, it would be important for it to demonstrate that those funds would go to a project within the vicinity, so within walking distance of a development site, and ensure that they are relevant and appropriate in the context of that development site. If there is instances where there are no identified opportunities for provision, whether that's existing or new open space infrastructure, that would be just where we're of the view that there needs to be that alternative option, which may be that if it can be justified that there isn't a requirement in the vicinity, a development wouldn't be refused because it is not making an open space contribution.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Over to the council then. So this is particularly about where contributions in new would be spent primarily, and whether that would be in the vicinity. And then if there isn't a suitable scheme, that development shouldn't have to contribute. What does the council think about that, please?
Thank you for that. Our approach to open space in our evidence space and the way we've approached it in the plan is to set out a hierarchy of different types of open space, recognising that some open spaces should be within close walking distance and provide a local opportunity. But we also have open spaces that are recognised as serving the whole borough, like Sandwell Valley, for example. So I would suggest that if we were in the position where we were looking to secure a contribution to off-site improvements, we should be cognizant of the hierarchy and the fact that even if there isn't an opportunity per se isn't identified at a smaller site within walking distance, there may still well be opportunities at a site elsewhere in the hierarchy, such as those that serve the whole borough or a whole town.
Okay, so is that set out anywhere in terms of clarity about how you intend to operate that part of the policy?
No, that's
So
not
what,
set
what
up.
you're saying essentially is that it wouldn't really arise a scenario where there was nowhere to spend funds in lieu, basically,
No, we
because
wouldn't.
you would spend it on a borough-wide scheme if nothing else could be identified more locally.
Yes, we looked at the quality of a lot of our open sites as part of the evidence, and although the quality obviously varies, but that did indicate there's lots of opportunities to improve open spaces in the borough. So I expect there will always be a situation where a contribution could be found that would be appropriate in an appropriate location. But I think that's fair to say, Inspector, that process probably isn't explained in much detail within the policy or supporting text, so we could include something to explain that approach.
Okay, Ms. Barton, were you sort of aware of the hierarchy approach? Does that to some extent answer your query, or do you still have a particular concern, soundness concern?
My soundness concern would remain. I think in the context of certain types of development, to ensure that they meet the relevant tests in terms of being relevant to the development and the other tests, there is case to be said that a borough-wide solution does not necessarily enable a development to be, it should not necessarily rest on that to enable a development to be acceptable. I think in addition to that, whilst the policy is currently drafted to allow for a route where on-site contributions would render a development unviable, likewise the policy should recognise the fact that an off-site contribution may well do the same. And in the context of delivering new dwellings, it shouldn't be that necessarily this sort of contribution will preclude the acceptability of a residential development.
Okay, understood. So another point in there for the council's response, please, about viability concerns if that was triggered from having to make an offside contribution. And then if you could just address the point that Ms. Spartan's raised about whether the contributions in lieu and potentially spending those on a borough-wide relevant site would be likely. I mean, obviously we can't get into case specifics, but the likelihood of meeting the relevant tests for those contributions. Please, over to the council.
I'll start and then I might ask for some advice from Hugh, if that's okay. Firstly, at that point about viability, I'd say that SID1 is clearly relevant here, because if an off-site contribution were required, it formed part of any other contributions or obligations that would be required to make the scheme acceptable in planning terms. And I think we've discussed previously that we haven't necessarily set a preference for those, that will be on a site-by-site basis. So it may be that an off-site contribution towards open space improvements would sit somewhere within a preference for contributions. And then in terms of the hierarchy, I just did want to point out that Appendix J of the local plan is all about open space and play provision. And we do include in Table 1 of Appendix J, we set out the hierarchy that we've used. So that has 4 different levels: borough level, which is just Sandwell Valley, and then town level, neighbourhood level, and local level, just to show there's that distinction. And would I be able to pass?
Yes, and residents of new development will have access to local space, both locally and borough-wide in the hierarchy. And if we're in a situation where financial contributions are being made in lieu of on-site provision, so if we're in that world, then it seems to me that so long as those contributions were spent improving the local space that would be used by those local residents because the local space was not being provided on site, then in those circumstances, spending in line with the hierarchy would meet the Reg 122 tests. And if it was thought most appropriate to spend at the borough-wide end of the hierarchy, then that would still meet the Reg 122 tests.
Okay.
I mean, the alternative would simply say to developers, I'm sorry, it's all got to be on site.
Mm.
Okay. Ms. Barton, one last chance if there's anything else you want to say on that. Otherwise, I'm going to think on that and move along.
I've nothing to add to what I've said in the oral discussions and in the written representations, but thank you for the feedback.
Thanks, thank you very much. And just, I mean, the council have raised Appendix J, when you were talking about expanding the supporting text to clarify the hierarchy position, obviously it'd be helpful to link that to Appendix J. Obviously the policy talks about Appendix J already, but I think if you're describing the hierarchy, mentioning in the supporting text, the table 1 would assist with that, wouldn't it?
We do have a reference to the hierarchy in supporting text paragraph 6.48.
Okay. Oh yes, you do. That's good. That's that dealt with then. Okay. So we've talked about policy SID 1 and how that would fit where contributions might make developments unviable. We've talked about the erroneous open space sites. What we haven't talked about in that regard is just to flag that there is a PAM 12 which is linked to that and relates to the removal of those 2 sites from the interactive policies map. So they are points to go on the policies map changes list. And then the other PAMs, by which I mean 23 to 27, which are the consequential changes to the ratio change, and they relate to Appendix J and will obviously also be necessary as a consequence of PAM 21 and 22, which will become MMs. The whole bundle should probably become MMs, I think.
Yeah. Yes, because by reference, Appendix J is really policy, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that has covered what I needed to cover on SHW 4. SHW 5 is playing fields and sports facilities. Sport England, who we heard from in the session last week, they effectively support this policy. They did raise one query about how and when the findings of the playing pitch and outdoor sports strategy would be kept up to date through the plan period. Is there an approach to that the council's got in mind?
I did consider this. I mean, my view, and I stand or sit to be corrected by Mr. Richards, is the playing pitch and outdoor sports strategy is something that the council produces irrespective of the local plan. So it's something that the council will refresh from time to time, normally every 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years, I think. There's nothing to say we couldn't add a sentence in to say that evidence will be kept up to date as far as possible. But it's important to recognise that the two processes are pretty much independent, well, not independent, they're separate to each other. So I don't think there is a need to refer to the PPS review in the Sandwell local plan. But as I say, I'm more than happy to be corrected on that.
The issue arises because the explanatory text in particular sets out what the state of play is with regard to playing pitches at this moment in time. Now that's likely to change over the plan period, and indeed the assessment of what is required might change over the plan period as well, because both are outputs of the playing pitch strategy. So if and when a playing pitch strategy says something different to the explanatory text, that would obviously supersede what was being said in the explanatory text. So whether we want to have a final sentence of explanatory text that says if and when the playing pitch strategy and/or action plan is updated, we'll need to have regard to its findings. That might be sensible, just to alert people that what's being talked about here is a movable feast.
Yeah.
Indeed, I mean 6.57 specifically refers to the 2022 version, and then it says where appropriate, developers will need to demonstrate that they have taken into account the findings of the Sandwell PPOSS in their schemes, and if that has evolved,
yes,
you that might be the place to explain that it will be refreshed from time to time, essentially.
Yeah. I think that's fair enough. I think, as I say, my concern is that it's made clear that the two processes are sort of separate processes. But I think it's fair enough to flag up the fact that the most up-to-date version of either document will take precedence. So if it's the playing pitch strategy that is refreshed before the local plan, then fair enough. That is what development management will take into account when decisions are made.
Yeah. And I think as that's potentially affecting how the policy will be used in the future, we'll have that one on the main mods list. It's more than just sort of a factual update, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. And Sport England made various other references to this policy, but that was principally in light of our discussion about Lion Farm the other day, so we don't need to go through those again. We've got PAN 41 to look at, which I think is a response to some comments from Barrett's West Midlands and relates to golf courses.
Yes.
Essentially, you want these to be clarification footnotes, I think.
Yes, I thought, we thought that was probably the easiest and most straightforward way of providing that information.
Okay. I don't have a concern with that as such, as it's doing more than just flagging up a reference to national policy or something. I think, again, put it on the MM's list for now. I've got nothing else on SHW 5. SHW 6 then relates to allotments, and the query here stems from something that was raised by CPRE and whether there's any significant risk, as they suggest that there might be, that the policy's acceptance of contributions in lieu of allotment provision might erode the amount of allotment area available in the borough, whether that's sort of temporarily, medium term, or longer term. Particularly, I think they're getting at the scenario where if an existing allotment was built on, contribution was made, and there was a period of time until that turned into new allotments on the ground somewhere else. So I'm interested in the council's thoughts on whether that's a significant risk, whether there are, do you have significant waiting lists, for example, for allotments in your area, like lots of council areas do? Your thoughts, Ms. Holder?
Yes, we do have waiting lists. We have a waiting list of over 450 people for council-owned allotments, and we have, I believe, a similar number for people interested in allotment, I assume allotment association-owned sites. So there is a significant demand for allotments in Sandwell. I think it's fair to say, obviously, that local councils are bound to provide for allotments. There is a duty on local authorities to meet the needs or meet the demands of local people for allotments. I think it's also fair to say that certainly with some of the larger housing schemes that we might see coming forward, I have noticed, over time there is a trend for developers to identify sites for allotments as well, because I think that is something that people perhaps nowadays are more interested in. So, in terms of contributions in lieu, I think that, we do say commensurate contribution to the enhancement of existing allotment provision. That's not the same as saying we'll take a contribution in lieu. Sorry, no, that I wasn't going to say that. Yeah, we're asking for enhancements to existing allotments, which might include additional plots, or it might include, land transfer to allow replacement sites to come forward.
If a developer gave the council a large cheque and said, "Here you are, go and find some allotments," would you be able to do so?
Well, I think I'm sure we would.
But is there land and or
we
open spaces.
Yeah, we have green spaces. I don't have a list of where the current allotments are. We can certainly provide that, but there may well be capacity on existing allotment sites to allow us to offer more plots. As I say, obviously there's a demand for around 1,000 new allotment plots anyway. I think it's unlikely that we would be. I don't think there's any of our sites that currently involve allotments or involve the redevelopment of allotments, and I think it's something we would not be looking to support if it came forward.
Do any of the site allocations include land that's currently allotments?
Yes, Lion Farm does.
It
It's within the boundary, but it's not proposed. That would be as part of the retained open space.
Okay.
Lion.
I think it's probably worth also remembering that there's a process outside of planning when it comes to the redevelopment of allotment sites.
Yes.
Because you have to get specific MHCLG approval to dispose of an allotment site, and there's some quite stringent guidelines in place and criteria to meet before you can do so, one of which includes demonstrating that they're no longer required. So I think in many ways, it's almost a belt and braces situation anyway, because of the safeguards elsewhere in legislation.
Okay, so in terms of my significant risk question, the answer on that basis would be it's not a significant risk. It's not impossible, hence there's a policy requirement for those contributions if that scenario happens to come up. But in terms of a significant risk,
we don't
the
see
answer
it
seems to be no.
We see opportunities arising for additional allotments depending on the layouts of particular schemes. And I suppose it's also within our gift to ask for additional provision where we think it might be, useful or helpful or help to meet local needs.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. To have an understanding of the level of need that you've currently got. That was all I wanted to tap into on SHW 6. Usual concluding questions about whether everybody has said everything they need to say on all of the policies that are relevant to matter 6, or whether there are any other main modifications that you wanted to raise, or any last comments. Now's the time to do it if that's the case.
It was just inspected, just if it's helpful for context, there is a map within the open spaces study of all the allotments in the borough, if that's just helpful for you to see where they are and their
yes,
spread.
please.
So that's figure 21 in document reference PPOS 001.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, so that brings us to a quick run through then, Mr. Richards, if that's
Yes.
all right with you.
So we started off with policy SHW1, and we're going to add some supporting text before paragraph 6.13 to clarify that policy 1.1 is a SIFT, and it would be carried out by all, and that the full HIA in policy 1.2 is the full HIA, full assessment where it's needed. We're going to change the title of the policy to delete the word assessment, so it's just called health impact. And then we're going to move the section of policy in 1.1 that begins such development, that's the bit after the sub-criteria, to be a standalone policy 3, and then renumber afterwards always remembering we're going to delete 1.4 by a main mod, current 1.4. And then in 1.1.c, we're going to define or explain in text what major means in major new waste handling. So that's SHW1. SHW2, we're going to make the main mod to policy 2.2 as set out in our answer to question 6.6. And we're going to by adding the word infrastructure, and we're going to do the same, although we didn't suggest it in our answer, we are going to do the same in policy SAW 2.3. Again, in 2.3, we're going to delete the 2 references to local development documents. And policy 6, we've decided is not necessary, so we are going to delete it. In the text, in 6.28, we're going to delete developer and insist development, so that no planning consultants apply for hip replacements, which is one of my favourite bits of the examination so far. But I think we just do that as an additional mod, shall we?
Yes, I don't think we need to refer to hip replacements.
Oh no, we're not. Don't worry. That won't leave these 4 walls. Then moving on to SHW3, the supporting text is going to be amended to mention the air quality action plans, and also to mention what happens when and if the air quality management area is lifted or reduced. And we're going to put the existing air quality action plan and the emerging one in the library. We've since found out that we're on our 3rd action plan at the moment, but I think we'll only put the current one and the emerging one in the library. I don't think you want ancient history in the library particularly.
No, thank you. That would be fine.
And then we are going to make a change to the policies map at the appropriate time to add a layer for the AQMA. Then moving on to SHW4. Firstly, PAM 21 and 22 will become main mods. Probably in the text at 6.48, we will add an explanation as to how financial contributions in lieu would be spent across the hierarchy. PAM 12 is a policy map change. PAM 23 to 27, dealing with Appendix J, will become main modifications. And then SHW5, we will update the text at 6.57 to explain that the playing pitch and open space strategy will be evolving during the plan period, and it's the most up-to-date document that's to be had regard to in development management decision taking. And even though that is a text change, it will be a main modification. And then lastly, PAM 41, the new footnotes will be a main modification. And I think that's it, because I didn't have any changes noted for SHW6 matters.
No, agreed. I think that is where we've got to so far. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for taking part again. I'll see many of you tomorrow, but we won't be seeing Mr. Carter again until Friday morning. So thank you for your contributions today, everybody. And I'll see those of you that are attending at 9:30 tomorrow, when we'll be talking about plan delivery and housing land supply and monitoring and all those sorts of things. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we can leave.